And I welcome everybody to today's webinar, and we have our guests that'll be joining us today from Treasury, and then also James from the Minneapolis Fed. He's the Senior Project Manager for the Community Development Engagement for the Fed. And we have Adair Morris, who is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Capital with Treasury, and James Clark, Outreach Manager for the SSBCI program. And Ron Kelly is the outreach lead. And I thank the Treasury and I thank James for taking this time on such short notice to answer these questions that are coming from the community. And then also, I'd like to, right now for the Native CDFI network, I am the interim executive director. So that's why you're seeing my face here, though we're going through a transition over the next few months. But any questions that you have, feel free to reach out to me at pete@nativecdfi.net. And I'd be more than glad to forward those questions on to our panelists if you can get those to me either before or after. So what I'd like to do now is take this time to introduce Adair Morris and turn it over to you. I don't want to elaborate a lot on introductions just due to the shortness of our time today, because I know there's a lot of questions out there. And over the last week or so, my phone and emails have been flooded. So Adair, I'm going to turn it over to you and your staff. And
thanks, Pete. Really appreciate this opportunity, and it's always an honor to be here. We don't want to spend the majority of the time or even close to that talking, but rather doing Q&A and doing more of a roundtable here. Having said that, we have a slide deck, and we're going to do just a brief overview. Most of you have probably seen us talk through this, but as the guidelines have come out, we have unique features for tribal governments, and we wanted to continue to highlight those and help tribal governments work through how it can work for their tribes. Just a big picture. In our allocations and the incentive allocation, when you combine the 500 million plus the other pieces of the other allocations, there's up to close to 700 million that can go to tribal governments for programs facing small businesses and entrepreneurs. And our job here and our heart is set on every penny of that getting out, working for the tribes. And so that's why we're here. We continue to be available constantly at your disposal to help facilitate what we can in information to make sure that the program works for all the tribal government and tribal people. So with that, let me turn over to Ron, who's going to do an introduction, and I'll do some of the tribal stuff at the back end. Thanks, Ron.
Thanks, Adair, and thanks to the Native CDFI Network for inviting us for this webinar. Very happy to be here. So I'm just going to run through a few slides here at the beginning that sort of lays out what SSBCI is, right? So the State Small Business Credit Initiative was reauthorized through the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, which amended the Small Business Jobs Act of 2010. It's a long way to say that this program existed before, and it's coming back now. The legislation provides a combined $10 billion in funding to SSBCI to assist states, the District of Columbia, territories, and tribal governments, what we call eligible jurisdictions, in addressing the economic fallout of the pandemic, and also to lay the foundation for an equitable recovery. But the focus of SSBCI can be much broader than that, and the fact that it's also a 10-year program and can really help to set up communities to make major economic transitions. Right? So of that $10 billion that has been set aside for the program, you see here some breakdowns in terms of where dollars have been earmarked I won't spend a lot of time on that, but 500 million has been set aside for tribal governments to support small businesses. So SSBCI provides eligible jurisdictions with funding for small business finance programs, which include capital access programs, loan participations, loan guarantees, collateral support and venture capital programs. Small businesses that are receiving support must have fewer than 750 employees. And an important element here is that lenders and investors must have a meaningful amount of their own capital at risk, and approved programs of each eligible jurisdiction must demonstrate a reasonable expectation of having a 10-to-1 leverage ratio overall for the program. And so why does SSBCI exist? I think this is not news to anyone, right? Small businesses face barriers to securing financing in the private market, which includes a lack of collateral, short credit or operating history, loan requests that are for amounts that are too small for many private lenders. Certainly, we're seeing impacts based on COVID-19 in terms of revenues and supply chain disruptions. Certain communities have long been underserved by the private market. And also, if a business is in early stage, it can often be difficult for them to receive equity capital. And so the program can seek to democratize where that capital is flowing. And all in all, right, sort of the bottom line is that SSBCI financing programs provide eligible jurisdictions with a flexible and targeted way to spur private sector lending and investing in small businesses. So with that really brief overview, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Jim Colon, who will be going through the next few slides here on the programs.
Thanks, Ron. I will say that I am here in my capacity at the Federal Reserve, no longer at Treasury, and the views that I'm expressing here today are not necessarily those of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis or the Federal Reserve System, and are strictly my own. Sorry for that tedious disclosure, part of working at the Fed. So I think I'm going to talk about the different kinds of programs here. There's a lot of variety in SSBCI. It's very much up to you. And I would encourage all the participants to start thinking about, as they're thinking about partners, to think about the different kinds of programs that those partners can bring strengths to, right? What are their expertise, and what is it that you're trying to accomplish in your community? And we'll go over in the next few slides, go to the next one into more detail on these. Next slide, yeah. So capital access programs are loan portfolio insurance programs in which both the lender and borrower pay an upfront combined premium to fund a reserve held by the originating bank, which will apply to the portfolio of cap loans. Jurisdictions use SSBCI funds to match the premium in the originating lender's reserve fund. As the account grows, so does the lender's cash collateral to cover losses on its entire portfolio. Losses from the cap portfolio are recovered in its reserve account if the account is depleted. The states have a lot of experience with cap, but again, to emphasize that because SSBCI, this is round 2, I would encourage people to either talk to Treasury about people's experience from 1.0 or to reach out with states that have larger experiences with specific programs. Next slide. So CAP program requirements have to satisfy the following criteria. The structure portfolio level reserve funds for each lender that acts as portfolio insurance to offset individual loan defaults. They must require insurance premiums paid by lenders and borrowers to be matched 1-to-1 by the jurisdiction. Qualifying loans for the CAP reserve fund portfolio insurance require for borrowers have fewer than 500 employees. That's a big part of SSBCI, is a focus on small businesses defined as fewer than 500 employees, and the loan amount does not exceed $5 million. And they must demonstrate how the jurisdiction plans to use the funds to provide access to capital for small businesses in underserved communities, which I think for tribes, it'll depend a little bit because there's so much of your territory and what you're looking to serve is going to be underserved. But that's certainly what this program is about. Next slide. So other credit support programs, non-cap or other credit support programs, OCSPs, such as loan guarantee, loan participation, collateral support, and venture capital programs are a little bit different. Loan participation programs are more straightforward. This is where these programs are providing risk sharing with jurisdictions by buying interest in a loan or making a direct loan side by side with the SSBCI program. So in this example, the tribe would provide part of the loan alongside a lender for a small business. Next slide, please. Loan guarantee programs where the eligible jurisdiction, in this case the tribe, provides partial guarantees to serve as credit enhancement for certain small businesses that would otherwise not fit within traditional lending criteria. Jurisdiction can use SSBA funds to guarantee up to 80% of a loan, although most guarantees occur at a lower level. Jurisdictions share the lender's risk of loss in the event the borrower cannot repay the loan. Again, I think loan guarantee is one of the more straightforward programs conceptually. Under collateral support programs, SSBCI funds are used in instances where lenders find the value of the borrower's collateral does not support the loan amount. I am very curious to get feedback from Indian country. I think collateral requests from lenders is a frequent complaint the Federal Reserve has heard from people trying to access capital, whether as a tribe or as a small business operating in Indian country. So under the collateral support, jurisdictions make a cash deposit at the lender to cover the collateral gap. Collateral support provides credit enhancement for banks to extend credit to these borrowers, particularly in some of the communities hardest hit by the economic fallout pandemic. And I think my last slide is coming up. So venture capital programs are different from the other ones. We've got Carl Fuchs, I know, has been talking to Indian country regularly about this, but this one somewhat stands apart. This is where, rather than doing credit, we're talking about equity financing for small businesses, startups, and other emerging businesses, including those that would have challenges otherwise obtaining equity funding, primarily categorized by how the jurisdiction engaged with the investment process. You can have private funds. Jurisdiction contributes less than 50% of the capital managed concurrently by private managers. So here, in that scenario, rather than partnering with a lender, you're partnering with something like a equity fund that is managing. Alternatively, you can have impact funds using state-supported entities or state quasi-public agencies. In SSBCI 1.0, private funds and SSE-managed impact funds generally and significantly outperformed state quasi-public agency managed programs. And again, just to emphasize that the states have been through this, Treasury has been through this, and very much wants to share that sort of experience-based knowledge on SSBCI 1.0 with tribes that are getting up and running. And I think with that, I'm passing to Darren Morris.
Great, thanks. So there's a lot of text on these next several slides. So the guidelines have a number of tribal specific items that are favorable to tribal governments to be able to implement the SSBCI, understanding that tribal governments and tribal countries are unique in the capital structures used as well as other features. So beyond the first point, which is that there's a specific allocation to the tribal governments, there's no restriction on which programs the tribal government can apply for. And then I mentioned that when you add in the additional funds from the other pieces of the allocations that are for what we call SETI, socially and economically disadvantaged, the tribal governments, that 500 million goes up to close to 700 if fully implemented along the incentive lines. Next slide, please. Importantly, tribal governments may apply jointly for funding. They can coordinate programs to get to economies of scale, to lessen the application burden as well. And so this is an important feature, and we can talk about deadlines and the such as the beginning of Q&A, perhaps. We'll come back to that. A tribal enterprise may implement and administer an SSBCI program on behalf of the tribal government. There's certain, there's the fine print on all of these things that It appears in the guidelines, and these someone asked about these slides, I believe, Ron, if you would shake your head that these slides are going to be available. Yes, yes, right. And so the other thing that Treasury has learned from looking at past implementations of programs is to not count employees based on affiliates. We understand the affiliate structure, but then tribal ownership of companies is different. And so this is a favorable rule guideline that allows for a small business to be an affiliate and have its own counting of employees to qualify for programming. Next slide, please. Tribal enterprises themselves may be permissible borrowers if they're acting as a lender or investor, conditional on certain managerial experience and other things, capacity that are in the guidelines. Tribal enterprise lender that, there's a certain, I don't want to do this next bullet, there's certain details about, what are the prohibitions on some of these exceptions to make sure that we're getting the spirit of what this lender role is. And tribal entities, so let me be precise in the way I say this next one, that the use of SSBCI funds for non-gaming activities, even if the organization has a tie to gaming, is permitted. So that opens up possibilities for tribes that have a core gaming economy or a core gaming component in the economy, and those gaming entities may be doing other things that support the whole ecosystem around the tribe. Next slide, please. And then finally, I think this finally, the tribal, one of the hardest parts about the SSBCI is the private financing, that for every $1 federal contribution, there must be $1 of private financing crowded in by the $1 of federal. And taking into account the unique setting of tribal communities, tribal governments, and the business environment, the guideline is written that tribal financing may include tribal enterprise funds acquired. So these will be private financing outside the small business receiving that entity, but the entity, the tribal entity providing the private financing can be acquire that private financing in commerce. And so there's, obviously fine print to that, but that is, we think, a big understanding of the tribal setting, and hopefully that facilitates the private financing match. Having said that, we're sitting here in the native CDFI forum. Part of the objective, and as a finance person, I'm a finance professor, and my real world until I got to Treasury. Part of what we're trying to do with the program, or maybe we would hope to do with the program, or we'd hope that the funding enables the tribes to do, is to build ecosystem of finances in tribal countries. And so to that point, we hope that we've provided the opportunity for private financing to come in, either through coordinating and scale up and providing the necessary impetus for the participation in CDFIs and others to participate and to develop out an ecosystem of supporting small business and entrepreneurship on tribal lands and for tribal people. I think we hit at the end, Ron, here. The conflict of interest standard. Maybe we'll just, just quickly. The conflict of interest standard, of course, there's, understanding that what conflict of interest is on a tribe is may be very different depending on, of course, the size of the nation, and other factors. So we have a unique conflict of interest standard for tribal programs. Next slide, Ron. And the land, right? Of course, what a tribe is. Treasury has taken for the purpose of using the programming and the funds. Treasury has taken what we hope is you view as a very open view. Obviously, transactions on tribal lands qualify. Transactions in states where the tribe is located, can be counted as in-state, using that state to not mean U.S. state, but a country. And transactions with tribal enterprises owned by tribal members elsewhere, and so forth. So these are important pieces of that. The intent here is to support tribal businesses and tribal entrepreneurship wherever that might be. Of course, there's provisions about the funds staying and supporting tribal communities as opposed to being out of state investment, using again that state word defined according to the guidelines, and so there's provisions on that the money must benefit the community, but we think that digging into the nitty gritty here, that hopefully the tribes will find this appealing way of viewing where the tribe is geography wise. Next, we're at the end, right? Yes, okay.
We're at the end.
Ron, do you want to comment before we go into Q&A now on the timeline, because we have some news on that, and let's go from there. Let's start the Q&A there if we can, Ron.
Sounds great. Yep. So we announced last week that for tribal governments, that the December 11th deadline for initial applications has been extended to February 11th. So we're happy to share that news here as well. So states will still be submitting their initial applications by December 11th, but for tribal governments, they have until February 11th to do that.
Ron, can we just want to emphasize that there's still the notice of intent?
Correct.
Right, and so Peter here is running all these numbers. Peter, do you have an update on how many notice of intent we have from tribal government?
Now, yeah, just to re-emphasize that. So the deadline for initiating an application has been moved to February 11th, which is the same deadline that you have to complete your application. So you'll have to just initiate at some point before then and then complete. But you still do need to submit a notice of intent, which you can do within the portal at any point by December 11th. We have at this point to date about 380 notices of intent from tribal governments.
So the notice of intent, I keep saying it takes 30 seconds, but Peter corrects me, it takes a minute and a half.
Yeah. So
that is the timeline on doing a notice of intent, and so just re-emphasizing we need to have those intents. So I think we have a whole team here now. Peter's here, Jeff Stout's here, plus Ron, James, and James. So Peter, if it's okay with you, what we've done is just kind of look in the Q&A and field them as our attributes lend best to that, if that works. And we'll just start from there. So Jeff, do you want to grab one and start, and then we'll just kind of rotate around and everyone chime in, and if anyone wants to come off mute and ask a question too, we're happy to do that as well.
Yes, I'm going to jump in before you guys start. If you do have a question to all of our attendees today, please put the *** speak and then ***, and we will make sure to promote you to panelists so you can have a conversation. You can also use the raise hand function if you would like to ask a question in person. Thank you.
Great. So I see one here. Can you explain the 1-to-1 leverage ratio in relation to the 10-to-1 ratio? So 10-to-1 is a requirement that is met at the time of application. It's a requirement that the tribal government demonstrate a reasonable expectation that $1 in federal funding will cause and result in $10 in private financing over the life of the program. So there's any number of different ways to accomplish that. Just mathematically, you could provide a small amount of credit support to a loan, supposing that actually causes the loan to happen, and get leverage that way. You could also recycle transactions. So consider a loan that's guaranteed, that's 5 years, and after 5 years it pays back, and then the tribal government could guarantee another transaction. And those dollars, SSBCI dollars, would count a second time and build up to your leverage number. But again, that is because it's calculated over the life of the program, it's not something that will be met at all times, right? It's presumed that states and territories and tribal governments will have to build up to that number over time. So it's not an ongoing compliance requirement that is enforced at any given time. In contrast, the 1-to-1 is a requirement, will be reviewed at all times, and it will be reviewed during your applications to ensure that your program design your program is designed so that it complies with that requirement at all times. In other words, if you, for example, provided a loan participation program, and that loan participation program funded more than 50% of a loan, that would be out of compliance, assuming you did that on a program-wide basis. So this is 1-to-1 is a requirement that applies to each program at all times, and will be reviewed on an ongoing basis as a compliance requirement. Hope that's helpful. Happy to take follow-ups.
So let me jump in with the first question here about getting CDFI programming funds from the states as opposed to from the tribal governments. So Treasury has really nothing to say about this in some sense. We're happy if tribal CDFIs or tribal facing CDFIs receive part of the programming funds of states, right? As from our point of view, the more opportunities the people of the tribes get, the better. And so we don't have there's nothing in what we're currently doing that prevents states from providing native facing CDFIs with funds. So I don't know what answer you're expecting from that. If the tribal governments choose to use CDFIs or choose to do things direct, is the prerogative of the tribal governments according to statute. The Treasury is just writing rules to the statute, and the statute empowers the jurisdictions to make decisions consistent with the rules that are best for their country. So having said that, we certainly hope that all of the money that is the tribal funds, as well as some of the money of the state funds, ends up supporting tribal businesses and tribal entrepreneurship and building ecosystems in the tribes and developing community new value assets. And so I'm not sure when you say this is a unworkable situation, I'm not sure what answer you're looking for. We support all of those pieces. So maybe we'll just move to the next question unless you have a follow-up there.
Adair, I have fielded that question a couple different times from different native CDFIs, and the question that comes up is historically, I guess, if a CDFI partners with the state, the intent of the agreement is that the CDFI keeps the funds once the program's over. And in this case, I think it's turning into more of negotiations between the CDFI and the tribe on who keeps the funds once the program's over. Is it the native CDFI or is it the tribe, or can they split it?
I'm happy to jump in here.
Okay.
So what we'll speak to is the rules of the program during the allocation time period, right? This is a program with a lot of flexibility, right? You can set up any number of different programs and partner with virtually any type of partner you'd like to implement from the public entity's perspective, right? What it is definitely not during the allocation period, at least, is a grant program. This isn't a grant program to CDFIs. As much as we all love CDFIs, that's where I come from, is working in a CDFI. I'm a huge believer in what you all do, but the law is not a pass through to CDFIs. It's to set up programs that enhance lending, right? That enable additional lending. It's not a balance sheet program. What states and territories and tribes do with funding that that no longer is required to follow the rules after the allocation time period is another matter. And we don't really comment on that. That's a prerogative of the public entities. We've seen from the last time around, that funding be treated in a spectrum of different ways by public entities. So I think probably best from the CDFI perspective to approach it as, what are the opportunities here to work with these entities, and not from the presumption that this is a balance sheet program for CDFIs.
I'd like to introduce Jack Northrup. He does have a question for you guys concerning what's already been discussed. So Jack, if you'd like to start your discussion now, you may.
Okay, thank you. One of the things historically, the money's been given to the states, which every state and territory has an existing economic development infrastructure. Everyone. I mean, I live in Vermont. I mean, there's 50 people that work on economic development. So it's very easy historically to transfer SSBCI 99 to 95% through CDFIs. That's the model that this whole program seems to have been like cut and pasted in. And it's not a criticism, and it's not. I realize you guys got to do the statute, but you're putting. Not every tribe is a state. Not every tribe has an economic development. You're putting native CDFIs, which have their own issues with negotiating with banks, as you know, into a situation of negotiating with an amorphous economic development entity called the tribe sometimes, with 1 or 50 EINs, and expecting them to cut a deal by February. I understand it's not a grant program, but under the state, and historically it has been a grant program. And so now a CDFI, a native CDFI, has to cut a deal with a tribe, whatever that means. And we know the CDFI fund historically also likes a lot of distance between tribal governance and native CDFIs. And so you're asking sort of to stir a hornet's nest up to a certain extent, all for the greater good, but just that's a lot of stuff to get together by February even. And the issue of all the tribes throwing their hat in a ring to get some bank to lend on a reservation under a loan reserve program, I think that's, I hope it works, but you can see the issues, right? And it's not a balance sheet. I'm not saying, hey, you guys need to make this an equity building program. I'm just saying that there's already on one side of the equation 50 state economic development infrastructures. On the other side with the tribes, how many are there? I mean, how many can we really count on 2 or 3 or 4 hands? And so I think it's difficult, and it puts the smallest CDFIs at a native CDFI at a distinct disadvantage through this process.
So let me just say, and I don't want to come across defensive on any of this, but let me just say something about the deadlines. And I'm going to address 2 deadline things. that are also in the chat and in the process. So the completed application deadline is February 11th. And yes, Treasury will do a recalculation of tribal allocations after December 11th, being careful. It's a recalculation of the formula, not a reallocation. But we have, as we did last time, but as we're trying to emphasize strongly this time, that programming can continue in the sense that anytime a state can come back to Treasury and submit a request to change the programming, adding new programming and so forth. It still has to go through the same approval process, but nevertheless, we know a couple of things. We know the time is short, right? Part of the reason the time is short is because Treasury spent again, I don't want to sound offensive, but we spent a fair amount of time trying to write the guidelines that work for the tribes since they were not in SSBCI 1.0. So we have invested in the tribes. Also, the money is just a lot more money. And success stories from the states in SSBCI 1.0 in venture equity and a couple of different kind of programs and some specific things have led to a lot of innovation thinking that we think will continue for some time. There's an incubator program built in. There's other things that we feel that certainly tribal governments, but also states are going to take some time to stand up, and particularly to reach these smaller niche programming needs, which you may say within a large state, a tribal CDFI may fit that category. So we hope there's continual evolution. Again, going through the regular process. I don't want to get in trouble with the lawyers here that are watching or listening over here. But going through the regular process, that there would be evolution. So that's the kind of the first piece, and we hope to support programming toward small CDFIs of all types in whatever we do and however we have these forums. And so we welcome further input on how we can support what you're trying to accomplish. So let me move on to other questions, if that's a decent. If you have more, Jack, on that, please put it in the Q&A and we can chat some more on that. Someone on my team want to jump on another question?
I'm happy to jump on the program income, or sorry, the admin expense question. The statute lays out a limit on administrative expenses for credit support programs. It's 5% of the first disbursement to each tribe, 3% of the second, and 3% of the third. So it comes down to just over 3.5% of the allocation amount for each tribal government, which is not a lot to run a 10-year program. We understand, but that's what's in the statute. So the way that we saw entities augment their administrative allotment last time was through program income, for example. So, the fees that are charged on transactions can be used to pay for administrative expenses at the state or tribe. From your perspective, a CDFI partner perspective, you would also charge fees and interest on the transactions that you lead. I think that covers the waterfront for the lending programs on administrative fees. So there is a cap, but it does, program income or the interest and fees charged by partners. It's another way to pay for the administration of the program.
Let me take a couple here, then we'll see Judy's got her hand up. So does the extension change our monetary allocation? No, the extension does not change the allocation. We will be doing the recalculation of allocations that are not taken for the NOI and then after the application period. There was a question about out of state, just making sure that I was clear on that. If a tribal member is out of state, off tribal lands, that tribal member is a tribe for programming purposes. The answer to that question is yes. The corporations, how is that helping our native CDFI? So I'm going to kind of punt on that, and maybe James will want to answer. But our objective is we're facing tribal governments, and so as you know, Treasury is a we love CDFIs, right? But this program is not the CDFI fund. This is the state, using that word to mean states, territories, and tribes set of money, and so that is just the short answer to that question. It's not my favorite answer. We love to support CDFIs, and we hope you view this program as supporting the native CDFIs. But others, Judy, you want to ask your question, and then others can jump in.
Yeah, thank you very much. I sort of have multi questions, a couple anyway, so I'll try and skip through them fairly quickly. So I noticed on the slides, and I've kind of encountered this before, but on the venture capital slide in particular, it mentions SSE and then quasi state or quasi something. I didn't jot it down quickly enough. So that language does confuse me, because I'm thinking, do I insert tribal government there, or is it truly a state something associated thing for that component? So if in some of your presentations and such, if we should insert tribe, can you just go ahead and put tribe so we know that that's what's going on with that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, let me reply. We have tried to use. Yeah, so let me apologize. We should not use the word state. We should be using jurisdiction. There's a problem that there's a definition of state-sponsored entity that doesn't necessarily mean U.S. state, but it means just a government-sponsored entity, and that's what that meant. But apologies if it implied something it denied. It was not referring to U.S. states. Okay,
yeah, please insert tribe where you can so that we know when to differentiate between the two. Yeah. My second item is I don't have a specific CDFI person that I can directly contact, so I have to send all my comments to that general SSBCI email. And I'm wondering if the name and contact person accidentally went to our actual tribal government contact rather than myself. So how do is there somebody that's assigned to each tribe to directly ask questions?
Go ahead, Jeff, you were gonna.
I'll let Ron take that one.
Yeah, at this point, we have several people who are reaching out to tribes and folks who are assigned to do that outreach. So Judy, if you wanna send a direct chat to me, then I can make sure that you have the contact information for the person who's assigned to your tribe. If you could just send me your email and your tribe, and I'll make sure to make that connection.
Okay, I will try to do that. I'm not sure if I can type it directly to you or not, but I'll see if I can do that. Okay, third question. How's it going with creating the frequently asked questions page? I still haven't seen that come up, but I didn't check today.
So imminent is it is you should expect it. Yeah, I'm not at liberty to say because there's legal pieces, but keep checking.
Okay.
Well, there will be in waves, Judy. The first one is in process. The second one is in process. There will be a third one. Right. All of these things are flowing as we speak.
Okay. And my final.
Sorry, that's unsatisfactory, but.
No, I appreciate that. So my final comment is kind of in the form of a complaint / recommendation. I don't know if anyone else from the tribes online here has attempted to do the ID me thing, or if they're having the same, like, it's just a barrier for me. And I really wish it weren't, because really this is just the application phase. It's not even the implementation phase of actual money, which you could actually have people just bonded in order to ensure any compliance with that. But this is just for the application. And I'm encountering so many barriers with the ID.me that I'm just about ready to give up, quite frankly. It just, I've been doing grants for 20 years and almost all the federal agencies use grants.gov, and it's just such a straightforward, simple process. We already do it. You're already sort of preliminarily reviewed and qualified in order to have that account. And, it just would be so much less of a barrier for us if you would have used grants.gov and if you would just eliminate the ID.me. Honestly, I've been on there 3 times trying to get there and I'm still not approved. So that's just my complaint and recommendation on that.
Peter, you want to comment?
Yeah. Adair, could I, is there any way that your team, can we go past 1 o'clock today just due to the number of questions we have? I don't know what your time frame is, but we have time available if you do.
Yes.
I'm sure some of us can. I'm
Okay.
checking them. But with the ones that can, we'll stay. I'm not sure
Okay.
that we all can.
Okay.
Peter?
So Judy, I'll attempt to answer. Apologize in advance that you've had frustrations with ID.me. Unfortunately, it's the system that Treasury uses in order to verify folks for applications, all of our prior applications as well with ARPA. I will note if you have issues, we have a support email, and we are also more than happy to reach out directly to you and assist where we can. We'll help you get where you need to get. ID.me issues aside. So please reach out. I think Ron will have your contact information, so we can discuss that as well.
So there was a question about Alaska. I believe Alaska is intending to, they have submitted intent to apply. Ron, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, all indications at this point indicate that Alaska is working to submit their initial application by the deadline. They did not participate as a state in SSBCI 1.0, but the intention, to our knowledge, is that they're intending to do so this time.
There have been more questions about February 11th. So again, it's a full application on February 11th. It's extended to them, but the full application is due then. With the caveat, as I said before, that in the coming years, Treasury not only welcomes but expects that some tribes will want to modify along the lines of coming up with new programs to get money out or changing allocations to what is working, et cetera, right? All these modifications have to go through the regular process, submitting a modification, but our SSBCI staff will certainly support this innovation. So hopefully that works.
This is Jeff. I wanted to jump in on a couple of the questions that address potential competing interests between tribal enterprises and native CD5s or CD5s generally. And I just want to underscore the ability here that where we hope that to tap your collective experience and wisdom on what the best implementations are, right? There's the model that sort of follows the states, where a state creates some sort of credit enhancement program and stands behind or co-funds CDFI loans. There's a model where the tribal government guarantees a loan from some third party to a native CDFI or CDFI. There's a model where the tribal government guarantees similarly other lenders, supporting transactions, and a CDFI is a contractor that manages the program. And then there's any number of different, overlaps of those models. So I just encourage you to think creatively and talk to us about what you're thinking about. I think some of the models that worked really well with CDFIs were the companion lending, where a state sort of contracted with a CDFI to manage their SSBCI funds and then committed to co-fund loans with the CDFI. That sort of solved the problem of the state not really having capacity internally to run a lending program by piggybacking on the CDFI's expertise. You can look to Georgia and Montana and some other states that operated those types of programs. So, if you're in the phase of brainstorming with your partners and tribal governments about how to formulate the program, we can have more of a discussion along those lines. But I want to be clear that there's no one implementation that Treasury has in mind as the right way to do it.
Jeff, along those lines, a couple of the chat questions were, can we see, the implicit is, can we see contracts so we can understand what these things look like, and from prior versions of states?
Yeah.
So that's
Dale and there,
proprietary to the
in
state,
some case,
but we maybe, I was gonna say, but maybe we can offer something in best practice sharing if some of the states that have done these contracts are willing. We can certainly use our ability to convene and invite some states that have done this sort of thing and might be willing to share. If that would be of interest to the tribes.
It's a good idea. It's a good idea. And I'll turn to James, who may have some
Jeff?
thoughts on that. But before I turn it to you, James, I do also want to underscore that the partnerships themselves don't have to be finalized and the contract signed, et cetera. When the tribal governments put in their application, they can describe the program, its parameters, and generally what they're trying to accomplish and who they're going to work with. But there's a little bit of flex there where if you're still working these things out, we can work with you. So I just want to take a little bit of the pressure off there. James, do you have thoughts on the?
I was just going to say, the state of Georgia that had a program that worked with CDFIs has made their documents available. And so we can provide those documents to anyone who would like to look at them with Georgia's blessing.
There's a question.
I would also add, I'd also add that many of the states, if you're reading, you find a model you think is interesting in some of the reporting, for example, a lot of times if you just dive into their website, Google, Idaho Collateral Support Program or whatever, their documents are on there for lenders and partners oftentimes. So, but feel free to reach out if there's something of particular interest.
So one of the chat questions is, CDFIs, it's a question, CDFIs could help the tribes without the capacity to implement and administer the programs, correct? And the answer to that is correct. There's, there's details in that. Jeff, do you want to comment or others on the detail? But certainly the answer to that is correct.
Sure, I'll comment briefly, and then unfortunately I do have to step off right before 2. But yeah, any entity eligible jurisdiction can contract with third parties to administer portions of their program. So the tribal government is still responsible for the contract with Treasury for overseeing the overall compliance, right? They're the counterparty, Treasury, but they don't have to implement the program themselves or administer the programs themselves, rather. They can contract with a CDFI or another entity, and the state's the same way. So, for what it's worth, I would encourage you, if you haven't already, maybe this is obvious, not just to be reaching out to the tribal governments, but also to states on this, that everyone's very motivated to partner with CDFIs. And my apologies for having to jump off.
Hey, Jeff.
Yeah.
I just had a text on a question. Can a native CDFI partner with the tribe and the state? I assume yes.
Yeah.
They can partner with both. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what we need to avoid is double dipping, using the same funds, same source of funds for 2 different programs, for example, or putting one transaction in under the protection of multiple sources of public funds, right? But otherwise, if they're 2 separate programs trying to address different issues or different populations, or even the same population, as long as they're not in the same transaction, I don't see issues.
So just, and Jeff, you can, thanks for being here. I'm going to have to go in 2 minutes too, but hopefully some of the other team can stay. But with the idea of coordination, coming back to this, we said at the beginning that you could the tribes could jointly apply and coordinate programs as well. And so there's some accounting that needs to be done in that coordination, but we're trying to make that extremely feasible for all tribes that don't, where the money is maybe not enough to stand up an economic development program per se, but coordinated, it becomes turnkey, and turnkey is easy. And so that is something to consider as well. I don't know, Ron, are you able to stay longer with? Okay. All right. So Pete, I'm gonna say goodbye for now,
Okay.
and then we can try to get this another one going on other pieces that came up today.
Okay.
And happy to keep pursuing. So thanks,
Right.
Pete, for the
Thank you.
opportunity from my
You
point of
bet.
view. And thanks, Ron, for taking over.
Yep. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Adair.
I guess I have one question for the Treasury team. Doing a follow-up meeting, as you can see, there's just so many questions to answer within an hour here. Is it possible to do a follow-up meeting with you that we could address all the questions in the next meeting that we would have? We wouldn't do it in a webinar format, but we would do it in a meeting format to where everybody is visible and everybody's able to chat and really engage in a longer meeting, because I know there's a lot of questions that come around program design. And so I guess my question is, would Treasury be willing just to have a meeting with native CDFIs who are being asked to step up to the table and facilitate a lot of the tribal funds that are coming down? And there's the partnership between the tribal governments and the native CDFIs. And being a native CDFI, myself, I just think that native CDFIs just have a lot of questions around program design and what's what can and what we can't do. And then the other thing that as a native CDFI, we have to look at the the impacts that it may have on our CDFI certification. So like you said, there's the treasury aspect of it, but we as native CDFIs have our we have a lot at risk as well. So, and we want it to benefit the tribe and the communities that we serve. So would you be willing to organize with us just another full roundtable, and we'd do it more of a meeting format? I think it's going to have to be longer than an hour.
Of course. Yeah.
Okay.
Happy to do that, Pete.
Okay, good. But if you have time just to keep answering some questions, that would be wonderful.
Sure.
You want me to read them, or can you see them there?
Hey, Pete, this is Pilar Thomas.
Yes.
Good afternoon.
Good
Hi.
afternoon.
I have to jump too, but I did want to maybe ask a couple of follow-up questions to some of the answers made to several other questions. I'll try and keep them brief. First, with respect to the reallocation or recalculation, does Treasury have an estimated time frame for when they think they're going to do that?
None that I'm aware of. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, because that's been to be frank, I know you guys are trying to get as many tribes as possible to participate, but at the same time, it's been a little frustrating that we don't really know how much money everybody's going to get, because you keep pushing deadlines back. And originally the reallocation was going to happen in the summer, and then it was going to happen in November. Then it was going to happen in December. Now it won't happen until after everything's done. So there's some challenge in program design when you don't really know how much money you're actually getting. We know we have a minimum number, but we also know we're going to get more. So obviously the faster that reallocation can occur, the better for those tribes that have raised their hand and said yes. So we have a good sense of exactly how much money we're getting.
So Fatima, I think you're, yeah. Good.
Yeah, as Ronald mentioned, we don't have a specific date, but the NOI deadline will enable us to know which tribes did not submit, and we will have a first round recalculation pool. Inevitably, we are going to have to recalculate after the February deadline, because not all tribes that submit an NOI will submit an application, but we will begin that internal process for that NOI deadline.
That'd be great. Thank you. A second follow-up question is with respect to in-state versus out-of-state. So we know that we can invest or lend to any tribal member-owned business anywhere in the country. So if I have a tribal member who lives in Chicago, I can lend to them in Chicago or invest in them in Chicago, even if my tribe is located in Arizona. But the way I also read the guidance, it seems to say that a tribe can also lend or invest in any state in which a tribal member lives. So if I have a tribal member who lives in Chicago, does that mean I can invest anywhere in Illinois? Or did you really intend to just limit that to just the tribal members who live outside of the state that the tribe is in, or that the tribe might have jurisdiction? I think that was the other clarification. So can you clarify that reading of the policy guidance?
Yeah, Pilar, so it is the broader reading to anywhere where the tribal member is located, and that's because some tribes have the majority of their membership congregated in urban areas, and those tribal members don't necessarily have businesses. There are no tribal enterprises, but tribes are perhaps delivering services to those members, so they are exercising jurisdiction within that state for the purpose of their members. So what we didn't want to do is to constrict tribal jurisdiction because of this state and jurisdiction restriction. So it's basically commensurate with whatever a tribe's jurisdiction is. So over its businesses, over its members, if a tribe happens to have jurisdiction in another state because of a treaty or via executive order, all of that, the tribe is allowed to certify what its jurisdiction is for the purposes of SSBCI.
Okay. And then a final question as a follow-up with Adair was talking about the policy guidance language around tribal enterprises and their funds being able to serve as the private sector match in the 1-to-1 requirement and the 10-to-1 requirement. So, so if I did a venture capital program, for example, and I had the SSBCI money and my tribe's tribal enterprise has $500,000 in cash that they generated from their revenue, not money they got from the tribe or as a grant, but part of their already ongoing business concern, then that $500,000 could serve as a match to SSBCI money in a tribal member business or another tribal enterprise or a non-tribal business, but that qualifies. Is that, am I reading, is that how that's supposed to work, or that would be allowed to work?
Or that's how it would work, as long as the tribal enterprise that is acting as the lender is not serving an additional role as an administrator or the investee. So they're just the enterprise that you're obtaining the revenue from for the purpose of the 1-to-1 is filling a separate function than another tribal enterprise that might all be under the tribe's umbrella.
So, okay, so if I have, let's say I have tribal holding company A, and they've got $1 million in the bank, and they want to start a subsidiary, and they're going to put some of their money into that. That would not be allowed then to use the SSBCI money and the holding company's money as an equity investment into that subsidiary?
Let us just double check on, because I know for this situation, we allowed tribes to adopt conflict of interest standards under tribal law to get at this issue of common ownership.
Right.
Let us just plan to get back to you to make sure that we're giving you the right information on that.
And
Okay.
one thing I would add to the group at large is that SSBCI, anytime you have a question about a transaction that you want to enter into, contact us. Our compliance team will take a look at the facts and circumstances of the transaction and give you a read on whether or not it is compliant. And so it's, you know, as you have specific events that come up, contact us and we'll work with you.
Okay, good. Thank you. That's great to know. That's it for my follow-up questions for now. Thanks, you guys.
Okay, thank you, Blair.
Thank you.
I have a question that came up when she was asking those questions. So where the tribal government can basically loan anywhere in the United States or wherever their tribal members and citizens live, the CDFI that they partner with, let's say, and this is something outside of probably what Treasury, but from a CDFI standpoint, we're given geographic regions that we can lend. So that's where a lot of CDFIs have asked me, even though we are limited to 1, 2, or 3 counties, partnering with the tribe where they can lend everywhere kind of creates a, I wouldn't say a challenge, but to a certain degree, a challenge, depending on how large of a pool they're lending. Has Treasury thought about that question? You know, like we have a 3-state region that we can lend in, and if I lend to somebody in Florida, or if 80% of the loans are outside of my geographic region, that could create a roadblock too, couldn't it?
Just
Are there
to ensure we understand the question, when you're saying the native CDFI acting as the lender, are you describing the native CDFI as acting as the administrator of the SSBCI loan, so a lender in the administrator context, or me assisting with that 1-to-1 or 10-to-1 ratio, so that more commercial lending.
More so acting as the administrator than even if we utilize some of our own funds and put it in that pool, I think you'd still have to, you know, go back to your geographic region that you can lend in as a CDFI. If you are lending some of your own funds and if it's going to somewhat affect your own loan portfolio. Maybe.
So, one thing to clarify, so if the native, because this native CDFI can wear multiple hats, right? You can be the administrator, you could be the lender, or a tribe could invest in the native CDFI. But if the native CDFI is the administrator, you're stepping into the tribe to administer the program. So anywhere where the tribe can make the loan, the native CDFI acting as the agent of the tribe can make the loan. But what you wouldn't be able to do is also act as the lender. So you have to elect which category you want to be in, because the rules have to be separate due to the conflict of interest rules. So that's where, you know, so if you're acting as the lender, then you'd be subject to maybe your existing restrictions as a native CDFI. But as an administrator, you're acting on behalf of the tribe as their agent.
Okay.
And Pete, I would add to that as well. All of this is new for SSBCI. You know, it's unlike a lot of the other parts. It's not as if we have prior experience to draw on. And so as we go through the guidelines, they're going to come up unique situations, such as the one you described. And again, I invite everybody, when you have those situations pop up, get us the details and we'll get a look at it and we'll let you know how it can be done or if it can be done.
You know, we're getting a lot of questions about follow-up meetings, and if possible with you know, James and Ron and James, that we can schedule something right away here while everybody's kind of fresh on, you know, the topics. And next time, like I said, we'll schedule it as a meeting so that everybody can have a lot of interactive chat. Maybe right after we get off here, if we could set something up, you know, before the holiday, because I think it's going to ease a lot of tension and apprehension if we get something before the holiday for another follow-up meeting, because I know a lot of people are on tribal councils. That's the other thing, is tribal councils have to sign off on certain aspects, and their meetings might not be until January, you know, not telling when in January. So I think if we can have some follow-up immediately, that would help.
In addition to that coordination with Ronald can speak to this. We have multiple office hours this week on SSBCI, and what we've been hearing from attendees is that it's helpful for them to learn how other tribes or administrators are thinking through these programs. So would encourage folks that are able to attend those, because it is helping everyone to refine questions and think about various elements of the program.
It's a good point, Fatima. So Pete, I'll send you the registration links for those office hours and feel free to share them with the membership. So we have them this week. We have one on Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, always at 4 p.m. Eastern. And they're designed to be for tribes, right? So we have separate office hours for state program leads. And so the links that I'll send you are specifically for tribal outreach. And Pete, I can give you a call later today, and I can see most of my colleagues' calendars, so we can find a time. Let's get it on the calendar today, right? I don't want to wait, and definitely can do it before the holiday. I don't think that's a problem at all.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'll connect with you.
Okay.
And maybe if we have a couple more minutes for a couple more questions, that'd be great before we
Hey,
break.
Peter, I got a question. This is Dave.
Okay. Okay, Dave.
In Arizona, New Mexico. So here's the concept. So the tribes that we're talking with, I mean, I think the feeling is generally, this is part of kind of the broader stimulus funding, and we just want to make sure that it benefits our tribes or tribal members. So one way would be, as I mentioned before, video. Sorry. Hey, so one way that we've talked about it is we make the loans and then they purchase the loans, or a portion thereof. I mean, I know we talked about this isn't a balance sheet program, but essentially, the trade-off is, look, we as a tribe don't have a lending program. We don't want to get into the lending business. You do. Please evaluate, underwrite, and originate a loan to our tribal members or our tribal enterprises. And then, basically the benefit that you have is that we'll purchase some portion of that with these dollars. As a concept, would that work? Anyone? Silence is deafening.
Oh. Can
I
anyone
think it's a
answer
great
that
idea.
question?
Okay, James, thanks.
I think, Dave, it's probably going to be one that we need to take back and evaluate, and we'll get back to you. But these types of potential program constructions are helpful for us to.
Right, because the idea is, if there were, and one of the guys said this earlier, or on a call that I had, said, we're kind of putting the cart before the horse. Is they're going to make this program available, and then the TA comes after. We need TA now to implement the program with our tribal members or others. So in the interim, can we do something creative like this until we build some capacity so that we can kind of make this a bigger part of our economic development program?
Right. One thing I want to emphasize that was mentioned before is SSBCI is a very flexible program. You do have the ability to make changes in your program to adapt to the situations in your community. A lot of states last time around, they started off with one set of programs, and within a year they were in with an application to dump those programs and create new programs because they didn't work the way they thought they would. And so as you are exploring options, keep in mind that what you put in your initial application that your initial final application that's filed by February 11th is not carved in stone. You can change. So you'll be able to adapt your program to the needs of your community and your borrowers.
Appreciate that. Thanks.
If anyone else is on the call and would like to ask a question, please do.
I just want to add something to the responses from my team to Dave's question. So one of the elements of the SSBCI program is to show a cause and effect, right? That the SSBCI dollars spurred private capital investment. So if we're going in later to purchase this portfolio, that demonstration and the documentation has to be there that it spurred private capital into these small businesses.
Okay, so that's a generally positive comment with regard to the concept, if I understand that correctly. Zakaria?
Yeah, I mean, I would contact the SSBCI inbox for that particular information. But if you are participating, in any transaction with SSBCI funds, the demonstration, the whole, the big picture over here is to communicate how private dollars came in on a deal as a result of the SSBCI dollars.
Okay, gotcha, thanks.
And I just put that email address that Zechariah mentioned in the chat for everyone. And that same email address can be used for any questions that you have related to SSBCI. And someone did also point out in the chat that there's a NAFOA webinar later today. So that starts in about 40 minutes or so. like I said in the chat, the main focus of that webinar is going to be on the application portal itself. And there'll be a demo of what the application portal entails. And there will also be time for Q&A there too.
Dave, Toby had a question here for you. Says, so following up on James Clark's point, is it appropriate as a regional tribal organization to stress to our 56 member tribes to submit their NOI with potential modification later?
Well, the NOI is not, go ahead, James.
Yeah, no, I was going to say the NOI is separate from the application process. Okay. I did see a few questions where people seem to think that there might be some connection between the NOI and the application. The only connection is that you have to file an NOI to be able to file the application. They're two separate things. The initial application that you have to file by the 11th of this month, you only have to specify the programs that you plan to set up. So if you're going to do a loan participation program or a capital access program or whatever the options you choose, you'll just specify the program, the amount of your tribal allocation that you're going to devote to that program or programs, provide the other required information that's listed, the 4 components. And then between then and February 11th, you can perfect your application. And if you decide between the time you file your initial application and you file your final application that you really don't like the program you put down to start with, you can eliminate it and put a new one in. You have a tremendous amount of flexibility. You don't have to tell us that you might change it. You just have the right to change it within the application portal. And I'd encourage you all to sit in on that webinar because it will be very helpful in understanding the application process. Second, again, after you have been approved with your application, then you have the ability to amend it. And again, that's just by notification. You don't have to give us a pre-notification in your application that you might change in the future. You have the right to change.
Yeah, just to be clear, because there were some questions coming in the chat, right? I think, James brought this up, I think, because, native CDFIs could work with either states or tribes, right? For states, what he's saying is accurate, right? In terms of the fact that that an initial application has to be completed by December 11th. For tribes, the NOI needs to be submitted by December 11th, and then they have until February 11th to submit their application. Right? So just that level of nuance, right? So if you're planning to work with a state agency, they have to submit an initial application by December 11th. That has some flexibility for them to be able to make changes. But as of late last week, tribes have until February 11th to submit a final application. And in order to do that successfully, I think to your question, Dave, the NOI is the gatekeeper, right? The NOI allows the door to open for an application to be submitted in February 11th. If the NOI is not submitted by December 11th, then that door is closed.
So just a quick follow-up on that. We've, you just reported that 380 NOIs have been submitted. And, like I said, we have 56 member tribes here in the Northwest. Our anxiety is some tribes are saying they can't implement, or they're ignoring it because they're working on their American Rescue Plan and leftover CARES Act money. We just really worry that a number of our tribes are just feeling they can't deploy it. We have a number of very, very small tribes with no native CDFIs. So that I guess we're just wanting to make sure we're messaging out by the 11th properly to them, just to get your NOI in and ideally shape a plan by the deadline. Thanks.
And the NOI doesn't obligate, but it creates an opportunity, right? You can submit an NOI and then decide, you know what, we're not going to put in an application. We would hope that you don't do that, right? But that is a possibility. And I would hate for a tribe to be thinking about it, then decide, you know what, yeah, we can do it, but we didn't submit an NOI, right? So the NOI, like Adair said, takes about 90 seconds, right? And you know, it's an important formality. Okay, I will have to jump at 2:30, 2:30 Eastern, so in about 5 minutes or so. But
Yeah, we can go ahead and wrap up maybe here in about 4 minutes. Does anyone else have any burning questions that they need answered? And we are getting all these, we'll print out these questions and make sure they were all answered. Then I'll forward these over to the Treasury team as well.
Hey, Pete, I got one last question here. What's the easiest way to kind of facilitate flow of information? So the two tribes that we've been talking to most recently, I mean, it's almost as if kind of like, Dave, you take care of this and just tell us what we need to do. But of course, they're the applicants. So how do we kind of, you know, I mean, I could draft emails from them and have them send them under their name, but it'd be a lot easier if we just kind of had a way to communicate on the technical details.
yeah, I think that's a good question, and I think it's an issue that we're facing with both the states and the tribes, right? In terms of if the states, you know, whatever partners anyone is deciding to use, we don't have a mechanism at this point to know who those are automatically, right? But one thing that we do send out now on a weekly basis is a thing called the SSBCI bulletin. And so if you want to be added to that distribution list, you can send an email to that SSBCI_information@treasury.gov email address and specifically say that you would like to be added to the SSBCI bulletin email. You know, it includes any sort of news about the program. Like that's where it's one of the places where we, you know, pushed out the news about the extension of the deadline for tribes last week. All the webinars that we're doing, the registration links are there, including for the office hours. So it's a good way for you to sort of get a lot of the same information that states and tribes are receiving. So again, if you want to sign up for that, send an email to SSBCI_information@treasury.gov.
And one thing that I'll do after the webinar today, I will meet with Ron and we can set up our next meeting. But I think it's important maybe that we communicate with native CDFIs and get all the emails to where they can ask direct questions. Because I know as things roll here quickly for the holidays, and I know how tribal councils work, it's going to take a lot of coordination, you know, just from the native CDFI's point of view. And then also, I think it might be important that on our next call, to a certain degree, I think the CDFI fund is kind of what we need to have somebody on the call there from the CDFI fund. So questions that pertain uniquely to CDFIs or native CDFIs, we might be able to ask questions of them as well. I understand most of the time people think Treasury, that you're all connected, but the reality of it is you're not. And there'll be some rules and regulations that affect the CDFIs when it comes to geographic lending locations, depending on what role they take as in the program with the tribes. But well, we will all get together with Ron and the team, and then we can set up a follow-up meeting here quickly. And then the next meeting, like I said, will be in a meeting format, so it's going to be really open dialogue, and we can set a time frame on that, Ron. I know that questions can go on all day long, but you know, maybe an hour and a half, I think might be appropriate. So I want to thank everybody for attending, and I want to thank the Treasury team, and I also want to thank, James from Minneapolis Fed for being on the call on such short notice. This started on Friday, I believe, and we were able to put things together relatively quickly. So, and I want to thank everybody for participating, and we will, this will be recorded, and we will have it available. And then, like I said, the questions and answers I'm going to forward on to are the questions, not the answers. The Treasury has the answers to everyone's questions that didn't get answered. So I thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.
You bet. Thank you.